First of all, Taoiseach, I'd like to thank you for your prompt action last week in relation to the pension being reinstated for Annie in Ballyfermot. But I want to draw the points out from last week because I wonder, Taoiseach, if you would join with me in marking the passing of the folk singer Pete Seeger. Pete Seeger wrote and recorded some of the most famous protest songs used by the civil rights movement of the 1960s, for example. And he wasn't just a folk singer, he was an organiser and a socialist activist, and him and the Weavers were blacklisted during the McCarthy era. Pete Seeger spent his life fighting for justice and against austerity, inequality and greed. However, the recent report by Oxfam aimed at the World Economic Forum and its recent meeting in Davos, which you flew out to after me raising the issues last week, shows a world of unbelievable inequality, enormous concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, and side by side, massive poverty, squander and disease. The 85 richest people in the world, they could fit into comfortably on a double-decker bus, have a wealth equal to 50% of the poorest of the world's population. That's 3.5 billion people. And the richest 1% own almost half of the world's wealth at 46%, leaving the balance for us to 99%. In Ireland, we have the same process of inequality. 1% of the population receive 10% of the national income, and they have increased their share of national income by over 50% since 1980. Some crocodile tears, Taoiseach, were shed at Davos, but as one woman said leaving the conference, the issue of inequality just seemed to have dissipated off the table. There was no serious discussion or support for the pledges which Oxfam asked the rich to consider: stop evading taxes and support progressive taxation, stop using the fluence to force to lobby and coerce governments to introduce policies in their favour, to disclose the real ownership of companies and to pay decent wages. But this is like asking a wolf not to eat sheep. So what we're dealing here is, in reality, is a capitalist system based on greed, profit and inequality.
Could I have your question?
And Taoiseach, are you, after attending that conference, hearing some of the comments and the request from Oxfam, will you consider and reconsider your austerity programmes in taxing the wealthy in this country and bringing in an effective corporation tax that will deal with the issues of inequality and social equality?
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Well, I think the late Pete Seeger's words and music will last for a very long time. I'm quite sure I could take consolation, I suppose, from one of the songs if I had a hammer. Sometimes it could be useful. But I recall the boss down on the point at the Seeger sessions, which were quite incredible. But the serious point you make about the World Economic Forum, that's been there on 3 occasions. On the first occasion, Ireland was in very, very poor shape. Last year, it was a case of discussions about the promissory note and what progress we might make. This year, there's a very different interpretation and perception of our country. But I might say to you, Deputy Collins, I did have the opportunity, as Taoiseach of a small country, to tell our story in a quite extraordinary meeting with people from the United Nations or the World Bank or the OECD or whatever, all of the people who carry real influence here. I pointed out the fact that, we live in a world now where 1 billion people are starving, 1 billion people are obese, and 4.5 billion in between have problems where, for the first time in human history, dietary problems have surpassed medical problems. And the influence and the responsibility and the capability of world leaders to actually impact on these things is quite striking. But it requires political decisions and a fix and a fixing of objective on what it is that we can actually do. And in this country's case, I pointed out the humanitarian exceptional contribution that our people and our country have made over very many years, as has been pointed out on many occasions, since the United Nations was founded. This is one of the few countries that can actually say that every day since its foundation we've had people on peacekeeping missions or humanitarian efforts in locations around the world. So Ireland's story of progress to date is one that other countries have an interest in, but it does require clarity of strategy, a clear plan and decisiveness to implement it. If we have that response from the European Union, think of the potential of what one of the largest markets of 500 million people in the world can actually achieve in the context of what you mentioned. Here at home, that's why we reversed the minimum wage. That's why we took 300,000 out of the universal social charge. That's why we didn't increase income tax. That's why we've improved the operation for research, innovation and development. That's why I was glad to see 2 days ago a firm coming back to Ireland and announcing 500 jobs. And in the context of the statement made there by the Chief Executive, he referred specifically to the benefit for those families where people would be able to contribute to the local economy again. So, of course, there are real challenges here, but they're ones that the government are not ignorant of, and we're very cognizant of what it is that we have to continue to do to hold our momentum, to keep our objectives in sight, and they are to continue to sort out our public finances and put our people back to work.
Deputy Collins.
Taoiseach, the Pacific pledges from Oxfam asked people in that conference to consider: do not dodge your taxes, which is done; do not use their economic wealth to seek political favour. That's lobbying governments to implement their policies in privatising essential services like water, waste and other utilities. Make public all their investments and companies. Support progressive taxation on wealth and income, like wealth taxes and corporation taxes. Challenge government to use their tax revenues to provide universal healthcare, education and social protection, which has been decimated in many countries, and pay a living wage to workers in companies that they own and control. This is about transparency and accountability and fairness, and that was not dealt with at that conference and never was going to be dealt with.
Question, please.
So are you going to continue, as I said, Minister, introducing, after seven austerity budgets, continue with the same type of policy, not taxing wealth, not diverting that money into where it should be, into the structures, social structures in the economy? And do you think, Taoiseach, that if you continue on, that there will be social revolution, as has been said in commentators on the Davos conference?
Thank you.